Okay, so I know a lot of students in Taiwan are probably preparing for standardized tests like the IELTS and the TOEFL to prepare for going overseas for grad school. And yes, you do need to take these tests to prepare and get into the program that you want to get into. However, the type of writing that you need to answer the writing section on tests like the IELTS and TOEFL is not the same thing as EAP writing. This is probably one of the biggest misconceptions about English for academic purposes. Students think that if I get a good score on the IELTS and TOEFL and other standardized tests, that they are prepared to undertake academic work in grad school in English-speaking countries. This is not necessarily the case, guys. Overall, there's a lot more that goes into writing an essay that is more appropriate for academic purposes than your typical standardized English test question, which only requires maybe 20 minutes to write and puts you on the clock. So in today's video, I'm going to be looking at a sample answer from the IELTS writing section, which received a pretty high score, and show how we could maybe convert some of the writing into a style which is more appropriate for a graduate level course paper. Hey guys, I'm Zane. I'm a PhD in the social sciences. I teach academic English, research skills, and I help people study abroad for undergraduate and graduate programs. Now, EAP writing entails a lot more than just mastering vocabulary and grammar patterns and simply stating your opinion in an advanced grammatical way. It involves a lot of other back-end work, such as doing the research, forming a coherent argument, using good examples, and of course examples are something that you need to use for standardized tests too, but when you're answering a question or forming an argument for an academic paper, all your statements need to be backed up by evidence, and they also need to be written in a more objective, less of a first-person style. So what I did was I went to the IELTS official website and brought up some sample writing tasks, and saw what answers that they gave as their official medium score and high score answers. I think they're broken down between band 6 and band 8, and we're going to be looking at the band 8 one today. And I'm going to analyze, first of all, why it would be considered a high score in the IELTS, but why it might not be an appropriate writing style for an academic English style essay for university or grad school. So the writing task we have here today is a pretty standard IELTS style question, and it reads, children who are brought up in families that do not have large amounts of money are better prepared to deal with the problems of adult life than children brought up by wealthy parents. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this opinion? Now, first off, this kind of agree or disagree question is very standard in the IELTS and TOEFL. And usually your answer in a more academic English essay, like in a 1,000 or 2,000 word essay for university, would be a little more involved than simply saying, do you agree or disagree with this statement. Usually you have to be basing your statements on research and on arguments and literature that other people have written about on this topic. So when we first look at the writing prompt, we can see that the topic is on family wealth or children's education or children's upbringing. And these are the type of topics that we really want to hone in on when we're thinking about how can we write this essay. So looking at the sample answer for this writing task, which is provided on the IELTS site, we see a few things. So right away in the first sentence, we see that the student says that they agree with the statement and quotes part of the question in his first little paragraph there. And then they write in the second paragraph, children of poor parents are prematurely exposed to the problems of adult life, e.g. learning to survive on a low family income and sacrificing luxuries for essential items. This seems to be his logic for this answer. The whole premise of this second paragraph is something that's very general and not really that specific. It's just using common sense logic to suggest that children who have poorer families are used to making general sacrifices, and it doesn't really provide any concrete evidence to suggest that that is true. The example given in the third paragraph really centers around maybe children from lower income families have to work on the weekend and make income for themselves, and they give an example that many of these children have to accompany their parents to a market to sell produce. They just simply say many children without saying any specific context or what society this might be taking place in. This is really something that we couldn't do in an EAP style essay. In the next paragraph, this student gives an even more precise example. I actually like this one better. In the second sentence, he says a relevant example would be Mr. Bill Gates, founder of the Microsoft Corporation, and he had a relatively impoverished background, but then he had the motivation to set up the largest computer company in the world. So we see this next paragraph here is about motivation. That's really a good topic to kind of divide the paragraphs of the paper between. But if we were writing an essay on this topic for a university class, we'd have to give much more detail than this. At the end of this sample answer, IELTS actually provides a sample of the grading methodology, actually giving this paper quite a high score, saying that it was quite coherent, it provided examples, it didn't have any grammatical mistakes, and properly used rather advanced English vocabulary. As I mentioned before, if you were to write a paper exactly like this for a course you're taking at a university overseas, it might not quite cut it. You need to show the professors that you've done research on the topic that you're writing about. We need to show that we have an objective study going on here, that your opinion comes from somewhere. That's really the key difference between an EAP style essay and one for a standardized English test. So now you're probably thinking, well, if this was a good score for the IELTS, but this isn't quite appropriate for an EAP style essay, what do I do? How can I transform something like this into an essay that's appropriate for a university class? Well, the first thing I would do is identify the topic. The topic here, it seems to be about children's social skills and their financial knowledge or know-how, and the relationship that that holds with their family's financial background. So I would personally start out the introduction of an essay like this, making a more general statement about this topic. We want to identify the topic of the essay in the first sentence, not just blatantly state our opinion whether or not we agree or disagree with such a statement. So I would open this essay with something like this. Numerous studies have shown great disparities in the social skills and financial aptitude between children from wealthier and poorer families, and give maybe one or even two citations at the end. These citations show that I've done research on the topic, and I've identified papers that have specifically done studies on this topic of wealth disparities and children's upbringing. If I were to write an argument statement or a thesis statement for this essay's introduction, I would write it something like this. Based on the findings of Roberts and Johnson's 2021, these aren't real professors, they're just names I made up, study on adolescent socialization, this article suggests that children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to possess stronger social skills and are more motivated in their work. So notice here in the first clause, I gave a citation. I cited a key reference of a study that was done on adolescent socialization. Notice how I used an alternative word to explain maybe youth social skills to not be repetitive. I also used some other advanced vocabulary like possess instead of something like have. And most importantly, I didn't use a pronoun. I didn't say I argue or I think. I said this article suggests. This is your thesis statement. And oftentimes in academic English, you don't want to rely too much on first-person speech like you would in standardized test English. The student who wrote this IELTS essay was definitely on the right track, but in order to write a more comprehensive academic essay, we need to do more research and we need to do a lot of reading, and that often takes a lot of time. That's really what differentiates the IELTS and TOEFL from writing we need to do for grad school. We would do the same thing in maybe the third or fourth paragraph, but coming back to that second to last paragraph where the student presented a contrary argument about what disadvantages students from poorer families have. This is something we want to kind of also present some more definitive data on, maybe cite some other studies of scholars who held this kind of opinion. But there's one important thing that we want to do at the end of such a paragraph. We want to emphasize why this perspective is not accurate. We want to present contrary evidence to this, saying, but even though children from poorer backgrounds maybe miss out on certain experiences that wealthier students have, this perspective only takes into consideration their pure, educational skills and doesn't really factor in their life skills and their social skills, which is actually the main focus of this paper. So I would write this statement something like this. Although Smith's study concluded that 78% of children from the wealthiest neighborhoods received higher scores on all subjects and reported having more diverse experiences, i.e. going to museums and zoos, the findings from this study did not measure these children's social reasoning and other interpersonal skills. So as we can see, we're kind of acknowledging the findings that this Smith guy, who I just made up, found in his study, but kind of deflecting the argument, saying that that finding isn't necessarily representative of those students' social skills, which is the focus of our study. And now coming to the conclusion, in the IELTS answer, this student simply just kind of restated what they talked about in the rest of the paper. But for a more academic English style conclusion, we'd want to do more than just recap what we discussed in the rest of the paper. We'd also want to give some analysis. If we're making an argument in our paper, we'd want to restate that argument. You might also want to consider giving a recommendation or a solution to a problem that you've identified throughout your paper. Since we presented an argument, we might want to present some analysis suggesting what are the implications for these findings and these studies that we cited in this paper, and maybe even suggest, future research could focus on something about this topic. And you want the conclusion to stand out and not just be a recap from what you stated earlier in the paper. I would consider starting the conclusion with something like this. This paper presented evidence suggesting that children and adolescents from relatively lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have higher degrees of motivation for life experiences and more adept social skills than their wealthier peers. As there is no conclusive evidence on the relationship between interpersonal skills and adolescent work experience, further research on this topic is suggested. So as you can see here, I did something a little different. I admitted that there isn't conclusive evidence on one aspect of this topic we're writing about, and I suggested that other scholars pursue this kind of study. This is often something that you might want to write in an academic paper in addition to just recapping. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you found value in it, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be putting out more content on EAP and academic essays, and everything you'll need to help you succeed in going to grad school overseas. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Have a good one.